Good evening, everyone. My name is Anneliese Kuemmerle, registered dietitian and program associate with Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Cape May County. Tonight, we have partnered with the Ocean City Free Public Library to bring you this evening's presentation on the DASH diet, or Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Our wonderful FCHS secretary, Brooke Sierra, is in the background with me managing all of the Zoom activities. And with that, let's get started. Before we jump in, I'll share a bit about Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is a partnership between Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, the Board of County Commissioners of New Jersey, and the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We are Rutgers' arm to local communities and have offices in all counties throughout New Jersey. We offer cooperative extension services to support the community and to deliver research-based information. We have 3 departments: Agriculture and Natural Resources, 4-H Youth Development, and my department is Family and Community Health Sciences. At FCHS, we provide outreach about nutrition, chronic disease prevention, food safety, and overall wellness. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is an affirmative action, equal opportunity employer. Here are tonight's talking points. We'll talk about what is the DASH diet. We'll talk about some research and evidence for the DASH diet. And then we'll talk about some ways to follow the DASH diet and fit DASH-friendly foods onto your plate. So what is the DASH diet? DASH is an acronym for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And there are several risk factors for hypertension, some of which we can control and some of which we cannot. So the things we can't change are on the left of the screen, and that includes our race and ethnicity, our gender, family history, and age. Those things we can modify, those are on the right. We can make lifestyle changes to lower our body weight and cholesterol levels. We can quit smoking if we smoke. We can move more to be more physically active. We can lower our alcohol intake, and we can always, of course, change the way we eat. The DASH diet is a flexible and balanced way of eating. I prefer thinking about DASH as a way of eating rather than as a diet, because the word diet has so many negative connotations. And we tend to think of diets as a temporary period of restriction that we go on for weight loss or for whatever reason. DASH is not a diet in that aspect. It's not a fad diet. It is a healthy eating pattern that is scientifically based. The DASH diet is recommended by the National Institutes of Health, Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, recommended by the American Heart Association, and by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And each year, US News and World Report publishes rankings on various diets in many different categories. And their ranking follows a methodology that factors in evaluations from 69 expert panelists, including doctors, registered dietitians, nutrition scientists, chefs, and weight loss researchers. Their 2026 rankings just came out last month, and the DASH diet ranked very highly. It came in first place for best heart healthy diet, and also first place for best diet for high blood pressure. For best overall diet, best diet for healthy eating, and best diet for pre-diabetes, DASH took second place underneath the Mediterranean diet. The DASH diet was also ranked the 3rd easiest diet to follow, again, just below the Mediterranean diet, as well as the flexitarian diet, which is a vegetarian diet where you sometimes eat meat. And again, the DASH diet is not a fad diet. If any of you were with us for my talk earlier this week about fad diets, you may remember that we talked about how fad diets exclude specific foods or entire food groups, often recommend that you buy supplements, and promise quick fixes. The DASH diet does not do any of this. The DASH diet does not require any extra special foods, any dietary supplements. It does not promise a quick fix for weight, does not promise rapid weight loss, although you can certainly lose weight in a gradual, healthful way by following the DASH diet. The DASH diet includes daily and weekly nutritional goals that are centered around eating whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods. And the DASH diet gives guidance about portion sizes of how much to eat from each food group, depending on how many calories you need for the day. The DASH diet also encourages foods that are high in calcium, magnesium, and potassium, because these 3 minerals are beneficial for heart health. The DASH diet has been shown in research to help lower blood pressure and LDL cholesterol. Remember, think L for lousy, that's the bad cholesterol. And the DASH diet has been studied by researchers for about 30 years. So there are many, many studies on the DASH diet. We'll only look at a couple of them tonight, but there are many, many publications about the DASH diet. The basics of the DASH diet are, again, eating more whole foods. So we're looking at whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy products. Foods like low-fat dairy, avocados, salmon, spinach, dark chocolate, nuts, and legumes are examples of foods that are high in calcium, potassium, and magnesium. According to the DASH diet, you can enjoy protein that is lean. The DASH diet recommends keeping red meat to a minimum, as well as limiting sugary beverages and sweets. Finally, another component of the DASH diet is eating foods that are low in saturated and trans fats. This means avoiding things like butter, cakes, processed meats, fatty cuts of meat, and sweets. This table shows you what foods are recommended on the DASH diet and what foods are recommended to limit. We see in the Eat This category that all 5 food groups are represented. Again, this is not a restrictive diet when it comes to food. The DASH diet does limit sodium, and we will talk about that. Sodium can increase fluid retention in the body, and diets that are high in sodium are associated with higher blood pressure. Have you ever eaten a meal, especially maybe if you've eaten out and about, and then you notice that you feel a little puffy or bloated? Sometimes even your fingers or toes might feel swollen from a high salt meal. If you wear rings, your rings might be tight. And the average intake of sodium for Americans is between 3,000 and 4,000 milligrams per day. This is well above the recommended intake of less than 2,300 milligrams per day. Less than 2% of men and less than 20% of women achieve this recommendation for sodium restriction. And as we'll see with the research we're going to look at, DASH works better if sodium is lower in the diet when it comes to lowering blood pressure. Foods that are high in sodium can be eaten in moderation, like restaurant and fast food meals. Again, this diet does not ban any food. It encourages you to limit high sodium foods. Processed foods like canned goods that are not low sodium or frozen meals with sauces, they can contain a lot of sodium. And salt can also be hiding in things like condiments, sauces, gravies, seasoning packets. Processed meat, and we see cold cuts, cured meats, they're often very high in salt content. Other things to keep an eye out at the grocery store are breads and rolls, pizza, soups that are both canned and soups that are pre-prepared are usually high in salt as well. And then, of course, there's the long list of things that might be a little more obvious as high sodium, like our snack foods, our chips, popcorn, pretzels, snack mixes, crackers, and even cheese and bread. So to decrease your chances of hypertension and to reduce your blood pressure, make sure to eat a diet low in sodium by avoiding these foods. So let's take a look at some of the science behind the DASH diet. The research for the DASH diet was first published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1997. 456 people were assigned to 3 different diets. And the diets that were tested were a control diet, which was a standard American diet. The second diet that was tested was a fruits and vegetables diet, which was the standard American diet or the control diet, just with added fruits and vegetables to it. And then the third diet was the combination diet, and that's fruits, vegetables, nuts, low-fat dairy with less saturated fat, total fat, and cholesterol. And all 3 diets provided about 3,000 milligrams of sodium. So this is more than the recommended amount, but less than the average sodium intake. And the idea or hypothesis behind this study was the idea that eating a diet with many different foods that have blood pressure lowering nutrients, those foods high in calcium, magnesium, and potassium, that those foods would elicit a greater effect on blood pressure compared to just eating single nutrients, such as those found in supplements or having a limited diet with them added. And the researchers concluded that the combination diet reduced blood pressure more than the other 2 diets. It also showed among participants in the study with hypertension that they had a greater decrease in blood pressure than those who did not have hypertension. The reduction in blood pressure in the DASH combination diet was comparable to that of people on medication for stage 1 hypertension. The study also proved to be effective across many racial and ethnic subgroups, particularly among African Americans who have a higher incidence of hypertension. The results of this landmark study contributed to much of the scientific basis for the dietary guidelines for Americans that were published in 2010, and later editions, the dietary guidelines, to make recommendations for blood pressure control through diet. And again, there has been much research over the past 30 years that supports the evidence that the DASH diet can lower blood pressure. One of the subsequent studies was the DASH sodium trial, and this was a tightly controlled feeding study, meaning that the researchers provided all meals and drinks to the participants in the study. So the researchers knew exactly what the study participants were eating. And in this study, participants ate either a standard American style diet or the DASH pattern diet. And within each assigned diet, we have the control and then the DASH. So within each category, participants ate foods that were either high, medium, or low levels of sodium for 30 days. And the researchers found that reducing daily sodium lowered blood pressure for participants on both diets. However, the DASH diet plus the low sodium, this 1,500 milligram sodium DASH diet, lowered blood pressure more than the typical American diet at all three daily sodium levels. So the strongest results came from combining the two strategies, from eating DASH and keeping sodium low. And that combination lowered blood pressure more than either approach did by itself. And finally, the researchers also found that these benefits showed up across major groups, across women and men, across racial groups. And during follow-up analyses, the authors suggested that people who started with higher blood pressure tended to see the largest drop in blood pressure, and it dropped up to 10 points. Next, we have the OmniHeart trial. That's an acronym for Optimal Macronutrient Intake Trial to Prevent Heart Disease, if anyone's curious. And this is another controlled feeding study. And in this diet, we have each participant in the study ate 3 different DASH style diets for 6 weeks each. So they went on one version of the DASH diet for 6 weeks, then they took a 2 to 4 week break, and then they started another of the 3 DASH style diets. All 3 diets had the same amount of sodium. They all provided about 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. So the comparison here was not lower sodium versus higher sodium. The comparison in this study looked at 2 versions of the DASH diet that were tweaked a little bit. So we have the regular DASH diet. The second diet swapped about 10% of calories from carbohydrates for protein, about half of which came from plants. So we're looking at beans, peas, lentils. And then the third version of the DASH diet, again, swapped out 10% of calories from carbohydrates and replaced those calories with unsaturated fats, mostly monounsaturated fats. And the main findings of the OmniHeart trial were that either variation of the DASH diet, either the version that replaced some of the carbs with protein or the version that replaced some of the calories from carbs with the unsaturated fatty acids, that they both reduced blood pressure and improved lipid levels. So we're looking at those cholesterol numbers again, more than the original DASH diet did. So the risk of heart disease also ended up being lower for participants on the protein and the unsaturated fat DASH diet versions compared to the original DASH diet. And the DASH plus protein diet showed significantly lower LDL and HDL cholesterol, as well as lower triglyceride levels. So it lowered that entire lipid group. The DASH plus unsaturated fat diet showed an increase in HDL, which is beneficial. The H in HDL we can think of as happy. That's the good cholesterol. So it increased HDL cholesterol, and it also lowered triglycerides. And then another study that was done, the researchers went back to that original DASH trial, that original 1997 set of data findings, and in 2022 published a paper that reanalyzed that data to see how 3 diets changed people's estimated 10-year risk of heart attack or stroke. And they measured the 10-year risk by a standard tool called ASCVD risk. And the tool uses several markers to assess risk, including systolic blood pressure and cholesterol numbers. The researchers found that both the DASH diet and the fruit and vegetable diet lowered the risk score by about 10% compared with the control diet, and that the findings were stronger among women and Black adults. The researchers also found that there were no meaningful differences between the DASH diet and the fruit and vegetable diet overall when it came to the risk score. So they asked why. And the researchers explain this by pointing out that although the DASH diet lowered systolic blood pressure much more than the fruit and vegetable diet did, it also lowered that HDL good cholesterol, and it lowered it by about 3.5 points. And the risk calculator that they used treats a lower HDL cholesterol as an increased risk for a heart attack and stroke. So the HDL change partially canceled out some of the DASH diet's extra blood pressure advantage when it came to the final risk score. So if you're thinking about trying the DASH diet, consider the version from the last trial that had replaced some of the calories from carbs with unsaturated fat that raised HDL cholesterol. So that's just a snapshot of a few of the major landmark publications that have been done on the DASH diet. Again, over the past 30 years, there's many, many more papers. So now we can talk about making room on your plate and how to fit the DASH diet into your lifestyle. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, or NHLBI, has a ton of resources for helping you get started with the DASH diet. The American Heart Association also has many resources about the DASH diet. And if you scan the QR code on the screen, it will take you to the NHLBI DASH eating plan website. And on that website, you will find recommendations for daily and weekly servings from each food group based on calorie level. You'll also find out how many calories you need if you explore their body weight planner, as well as tips for reducing your sodium intake, tips for staying on track with the DASH diet, and my favorite, a ton of recipes. There's a ton of recipes on the website too. So I encourage everybody to check it out. And of course, we'll be sending out some recipes after the presentation, as well as, again, we'll send this link out too, so that you can visit NHLBI if you so desire. The chart on the screen shows the recommendations for daily and weekly servings from each food group if you are following a 2,000 calorie diet per day. And again, if you follow the QR code, you can find daily and weekly servings based on different calorie budgets. The DASH diet emphasizes grains. They encourage whole grains, about 6 to 8 servings per day, and plenty of produce. We are looking at 4 to 5 servings of veggies every day, as well as 4 to 5 servings of fruit every day. Fruits and vegetables are high in potassium, and many have magnesium as well. And then to get that calcium in, DASH recommends that you include 2 to 3 servings of low-fat or fat-free dairy for both calcium and for protein. For our protein foods, the DASH diet recommends 6 servings or less of meats, poultry, and fish. And this encourages reasonable portion sizes of our protein food, and it also leaves room for plant proteins. We see down in the weekly servings category, 4 to 5 servings per week of nuts, seeds, dry beans, and peas. You can also use canned beans, and if they are not low sodium, drain them and rinse them to help reduce that sodium content. And when you're opting for plant proteins, pick whole food sources like beans, peas, lentils, tofu. Those are preferable over processed meat substitutes, which can be very high in sodium as well as very high in saturated fat. When we are looking at restricting saturated fat intake under the DASH diet, we're also including plant-based saturated fats like coconut oil and palm oil. So beware those processed plant protein meat substitute nugget burger items. Added fats aren't eliminated on the DASH diet, but they're kept moderate at 2 to 3 servings of fats and oils per day. Again, we're focusing on healthier unsaturated fats. So these are going to come from vegetable oil, olive oil, canola oil. And the sodium target that's listed here is 2,300 milligrams per day. They do have an asterisk on their table on their website that this is a starting goal for many people, and to keep in mind that if you are able to lower that sodium intake down to 1,500 milligrams per day, that can bring you even more blood pressure lowering benefits that we see in the research. And then we have the weekly servings, the nuts, seeds, dry beans, and peas, and sweets are in that category too. This shows what you can have regularly, but not necessarily daily. Nuts and seeds, although they are a great source of heart-healthy fats, they are a high-calorie food too, so being mindful of the portion size is helpful when we're looking at our nuts and seeds. And we also see that sweets are not completely excluded on this diet. No food is banned, but they are kept in moderation at 5 or fewer servings per week. And I will say, as a friendly reminder to everyone, whenever we embark on making diet changes, we encourage you to start gradually with realistic and achievable goals. You might start out by maybe swapping a higher sodium processed meat, like deli meat, if you take a turkey sandwich to work, swap that out for some homemade roasted chicken breast with a low sodium seasoning blend on it to make sandwiches. You could also swap your bread out for a whole grain bread, a wrap for a whole grain wrap. Another easy swap to gradually get you started eating a DASH plan could be swapping out a processed or a prepackaged snack by opting for fruit and low-fat yogurt or veggie sticks and hummus. Sesame and tahini are also high in unsaturated fat. That counts as a heart-healthy fat, and hummus generally has tahini in it. And another strategy for helping get on board with these serving sizes is to make a meatless meal at home. You can make chili or bean soup that's vegetarian, quinoa burgers, and this can help keep that intake of animal protein within that 6 or less servings per day recommendation. Using your plate as a guide can also help you spread out the recommended portions throughout the day. We saw how the DASH eating pattern emphasizes vegetables, fruits, whole grains, low-fat dairy, and lean proteins. So using the plate method can help you build a DASH-friendly meal without having to necessarily count every serving or count every calorie. The plate image on the screen comes from Harvard Medical School and Harvard Health Publishing. And this shows a healthy plate that features half a plate of fruit and veggies, a quarter plate of whole grains, and a quarter plate of protein. This plate also emphasizes the heart-healthy oils that are recommended on the DASH eating plan, like olive, canola, and vegetable oils. We also see alongside the plate water as a beverage instead of a sugar-sweetened drink. You could also opt for a 0-calorie seltzer or club soda that's naturally flavored, or do a squeeze of lemon or lime, or steep some water in cucumber slices if you prefer to drink something that has a little more flavor to it. And some shopping tips if you're interested in buying some DASH-friendly groceries. Again, we're looking at an eating pattern that's built from everyday, whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed whole foods. So produce is first on the list. We have veggies and fruits. Your produce can be fresh, frozen, or low sodium canned versions. If you're buying canned fruit, look for fruit that's packaged in 100% fruit juice that has 0 added sugar. And a practical DASH shopping strategy is to start with the perimeter of the grocery store. So you go to the produce section, go to the dairy section, go to the protein section, and then choose from the center aisles minimally processed staples like oats, brown rice, beans, canned tuna or salmon. And when you're in the meat section, look for poultry, fish, and lean meats instead of cured food like bacon or ham. And in the dairy section, to follow DASH, it's recommended to opt for low-fat dairy instead of full-fat dairy, and that will help lower your saturated fat intake. For frozen, canned, and packaged foods, we have to always be on our label lookout. Look for no salt added and low sodium on the front of the package. That's a good starting point. I always say beware, there is a lower sodium front label that can be a little misleading. You definitely want to flip it over and look at that nutrition facts label. Some of the lower sodium foods are still high sodium. It's just lower than another version of the same thing. So flip over the package, check out the label. It's helpful to compare labels across brands because sodium can vary a lot between different brands of the same thing. I've seen this a ton with things like bread and pasta sauce in the grocery store. And I also want to point out that low sodium on the front label, that is regulated by the FDA, that term, and it can only be used on foods that have 140 milligrams or less of sodium per serving. So we always have to also check out the serving size. And if we're having 2 cups of this, then we have to double the amount of sodium that it contains. If you're shopping for whole grains, a quick and easy thing to look for is this whole grain stamp. That's on things like brown rice, whole grain, whole wheat crackers, bread, pasta, and the whole grain stamp helps you just find them a little bit faster. So the next time you're out shopping, I encourage you to check out the nutrition facts label and compare a couple of the products that you usually buy. Again, with the gradual change, I don't encourage you to go to the store and look at every label on every single thing. That can be overwhelming and you'll spend hours in the grocery store. None of us have that kind of time. So slowly build a DASH-friendly pantry just without feeling overwhelmed by checking out a few staples each week when you go. And remember from earlier that the DASH diet encourages foods that are high in calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And that trial showed that adding unsaturated fat, specifically monounsaturated fat, also helped increase that HDL good happy cholesterol. So here on the screen, there's just some ideas of foods for you that are good sources of these nutrients. Of course, our low-fat dairy is going to take the cake in the calcium category. If you do not consume dairy products from cows, fortified plant milks are also another alternative. Also, canned salmon with bones, that's another calcium source. And our green leafy veggies hit our calcium category, our magnesium category, and also our potassium category. So we can't go wrong with our green leafy friends. They are easy to throw into a pot of soup, which given all the snow and ice we have outside right now, could be very nice comfort food on a chilly winter evening. Potassium, I refused to write bananas on the list because we all know about bananas. But potatoes, a baked potato has twice as much potassium as a banana. If you're boiling your potatoes, some of the potassium comes out. But roasted baked potatoes are a great source of potassium, as are our citrus fruits. And when we see summer again and have Jersey tomatoes, tomatoes are also a great source of potassium. If you're looking for adding some monounsaturated fats to your diet, avocados, olive oil, walnuts are great sources of the monounsaturated fats. And in general, to hit the unsaturated fat category, we can also throw in vegetable oil, canola oil, pumpkin seeds, fatty fish. We have our salmon showing up again, and the whole grains that are recommended on the DASH diet are going to give us magnesium. So there are so many ways to add flavor to your food without having to add salt. And I also would like to point out that most of the sodium that we consume in this country is already in the food that we're eating and buying. It's already in processed foods. So even just cooking for yourself at home a few nights a week is a great first step to lowering your salt intake. And we have a nice long list. The American Heart Association recommends using ingredients like onions, garlic, herbs, spices. You can even use citrus juice. Think a nice marinade with some orange, lemon, or lime. Also, vinegar is another great way to add flavor. And that can help replace some or all of the salt that you might have otherwise added. Herbs and spices also, again, make our food awesome and help reduce the need to pick up that salt shaker. If you are buying seasoning blends at the grocery store, that is another label lookout item. The key is to choose salt-free or low-sodium blends when you can. And again, flip it over, look under the hood, check out that nutrition facts label, because some packaged seasoning mixes can have a surprising amount of sodium in them. And just like we talked about with the other foods, the sodium in seasoning blends can vary a lot between brands. So if you pick one up and it's very high, don't be discouraged, put it down, pick up another brand and see what you find. And if you are purchasing canned beans or canned vegetables, draining and rinsing them can help reduce the sodium. And the American Heart Association notes that this can cut the sodium by about 40%. So here are the key takeaways for tonight's class. I put that QR code up again for NHLBI and their amazing set of resources that they offer. But the key takeaway is the DASH diet is a science-backed way of eating. Again, it's been studied for almost 30 years, and it can help lower your blood pressure and help heart health. And I encourage you to try something new and fun. Swap that salt out for a fun flavor profile. These are some of the references that went into tonight's talk. And thank you, everyone, for spending your evening with us. And thank you again to the Ocean City Free Public Library for partnering with us for tonight's talk. And I have also shared on the screen on the right some information about the Empower to Prevent Type 2 Diabetes program, which is a year-long program nationally recognized by the CDC. The program is free and offered over Zoom as evening classes. And I will be teaching it with the Somerset County FCHS team starting in May. And I encourage anyone who's interested to scan that QR code and see if you are eligible. And I would love to see you there.